when it comes to recording in view, is it like it records in the same view that I see?
I'm
Uh,
pretty sure it does. Yes.
so if I change between the views, then the recording will change too. Okay.
Yes. I've noticed that myself.
Yeah.
So if I forget to go into
But only
gallery,
for the one who records, isn't it?
yes.
Because there's
That's right.
some occasions when it's more appropriate to have gallery view and others where it's good to have the close-up. So maybe
Yeah.
maybe it's good to kind of move between them.
Especially if somebody's showing some art, like Harry, or if somebody's doing a screen share, it's too small in gallery view to see what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you all. I actually have some very specific thoughts for today, but shall we do a check-in? Or shall we wait for more people to come in, and shall we just do a open discussion until we decide we have quorum? I know it's late for you people in Europe, so I don't want to waste your time.
Yeah. So could you say in keywords like what your thoughts were, something?
For today?
Yeah.
Yes. I wrote up an announcement 5 hours ago saying, in my opinion, there's some things we need to do very specifically to foster this particular community and what we're doing here. And it's not a surprise that it involves what kinds of communication mechanisms we have outside of this particular meeting. So I wanted to raise the issue of the different kinds of communications, and therefore then the different kinds of tools associated with what we could do independent of these face-to-face meetings. So the general theme is shared memory. A shared memory comes in 8 or 9 different forms, as I previously indicated that I believe. And so I'd like to go through some of that. I know that we've touched on it, but I want to get very specific, and I want to actually make some decisions. And I'd like to get some really good discussion going, because without that, I think that everyone still is unsure what is really happening in this group. And I at least would like to take my opportunity to push that forward. It may not succeed, but while I've got the floor, I'd like to do this.
Were you thinking about talking about your idea of time browser? Is that relevant?
No,
to this?
time browser is more future, and it requires development. What I'm talking about is right now, today, this moment, how do we decide to use something for shared memory, something for calendar, something for tracking action items, something for tracking third-party things, something for tracking a chronolog, all of those different things that I've identified under the 8 Artifacts blog. And I know that there's some discussion because not many people see the need for it, and some people even disagree with what each of those is. And even if you agree for each of those intentions, there are potentially many different choices we can make. And I just want to make sure that we discuss it and do the best we can today.
Yeah, have you followed the thread in Sutra where we talked a little about the blog? Because we had a fairly interesting thread there, but not so many people participating. But
I think I only saw the early beginnings of that Sutra thread because there's been so much, I haven't kept track of everything. Can you summarize quickly what you think has been discussed there?
Well, I mean, it was fairly large scale, but it was one guy, I think it was Stefan Kreutzer or something, maybe you know him, and he knew quite a bit about Doug Engelbart, and he had a few questions, and we sort of went a little back and forth about the information, the technology, the sort of platform that we would want to see, and what to do with audio recordings, for example, or the transcripts, and he had many ideas about that. So
So
Yeah.
thank you for summarizing to that level. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. I'm going to let you continue. But yes, I do know Stefan Kreutzer. He, in fact, impresses me by the amount of time he spends following Doug Engelbart activities and GCC activities. To my knowledge, he has listened to dozens, if not hundreds, of my audio meeting recordings since 2012. And he is viewing almost every one of these GCC video recordings and commenting on them. So he's doing quite a diligent job of understanding what we're trying to do here. I am really impressed with the amount of time he's investing in this. I actually have not talked to him in real time, face to face yet, but he and I have chatted online on many occasions, and I respond to as many of his comments on these videos as I can. I don't think he and I have fundamentally deep disagreements, although we haven't really understood, I haven't really understood him. He probably understands what I say much deeper because I haven't delved into his thinking and his works as much as he have delved into the stuff that I've made available. So sorry, I just wanted to give you that context that yes, I'm familiar with who he is, and he spends an impressive amount of time trying to understand what we're doing and what was doing with Doug. And in fact, he's also active in this thing called Doug 50. The Doug 50 group is planning for a December 9th event this year because that's the 50th anniversary of Doug Engelbart's demo. And there's a group of people, and I'm only loosely affiliated with them, but some other people I've mentioned, like Frode Hagelin, are very active and meet weekly towards that objective. Vince Cerf, by the way, the inventor of the internet, is loosely tracking that particular activity as well. So Stefan actually knows everything that's going on in that group as well.
Yeah, I got the impression he'd listened quite a bit because he mentioned several things we talked about, and he gave a very good description of Doug's vision, Doug Breitbart's idea, but he kind of summed that up very well, I thought. So we kind of talked a little around that. So
I was curious, Heiner, did you attend those? Did you hear him speak about this?
No, but I feel I would really like us to urge.
I really can't hear you.
Because our this conversation on May 10th.
Can everybody hear Heiner? My speakers are at maximum, and I cannot hear Heiner. Yeah, Gertrude, it looks like, could you make your microphone sensitivity increase?
I think there was some glitches with Heiner there. Well, one thing just came to my mind was Heiner said, talked a lot about how it could be good for us to have a larger variety of people attending these calls. And I think that's interesting, and it relates to how we use the Facebook page, because the Facebook page, at the moment at least, is sort of the entrance to this group, and so that's also maybe an interesting thing to have in mind about today's theme. So, but I think Heiner has some internet trouble there.
Yeah, Heiner, I got to apologize. I had extreme problem hearing you.
Yes, same here.
Hi, Jaswinder. Okay. Hey, Gertrude. Also, I wanted to almost up front apologize to you because what I'm trying to say today may be very specific, less heart-centric, more mental it might feel today. I apologize to you because I think some of these technical details and these agreements that I'm looking to make, although they come from a concern that is very heart-centered, feel and sound perhaps like they're very mental. So if it does, I wanted to apologize for that in advance. I mean, the whole reason for suggesting these things is so that we can actually be more closely knit, we can actually be more aligned, so we can actually do much more interaction together. But in some of those discussions, when we say, are we going to use Google Docs? Are we going to use this tool? Are we going to write blogs? Are we going to comment? I mean, it's harder to make sure that every one of those statements and conversations is heart-centered and not so mental. So I may have to master that a bit better, but that's my form of an initial upfront blanket apology if this conversation goes that way, Gertrude.
Yeah, thank you. And yesterday I had a coaching with a leader, and we were talking about what's her problem with her staff. And then she realized that she needs a tool that is not personal, that is not like I have to interact with this person and then it becomes very personal, but to have something that applies for everything, for all those things, those conversations. And so she can introduce it as like, this is how we are going to do this, without always going through that personal realm, and having just a device, and then everybody can just fill in and do the things, because that's the way we do it. So thank you for your concern about me, but actually I'm not that far away from.
Okay, so if that's the case, then also I might apologize.
Thinking that this might be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I may be doing you a disservice by making some assumptions here that, again, are not accurate. So on both ways, I extend my apologies if either case applies.
Okay, good. Heard it. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you know if anyone else is coming, or maybe we don't know?
I don't know, but I don't want to waste the time of the people who are on time. So I do propose that we begin our check-in round, if we like to do that. And then I can summarize yet again, if you like, what I would like to see for this conversation. And let's see where it goes.
Actually, I already had my check-in when you asked me. I had a wonderful day, and I could sleep enough last night so I can be here, alert. And
you look refreshed. You look happy, Gertrude. I like it.
Yep. Yesterday was really true. Dead.
I'm tired of check-ins.
He's tired of check-ins, he said.
Oh, Heiner's tired of check-ins. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just have a very brief check-in. I mean, feeling good and quiet day here, really. But so as I understood it for today, it's a deep dive into Sam's work. But you said that you would like to talk about specific next steps. And I guess that is a natural continuation to the last session about the community of impact, because I do feel that this group is a community of impact, at least in its early stages. So yeah, so well, let's get down to it. And maybe Jaswinder wants to say hello.
Had a wonderful day, been out and about in the glorious sunshine. Traveled a lot, met some friends. Can we get on with it now? Thank you, Sam.
Okay, so I will do a quick check-in. Next week, starting Monday, I'm going to be in California for 5 days. So yet again, very busy. I'm not going to be able to attend next Thursday or Friday, but I will be back home at my desk here Friday night. So I will be able to attend again a week from now. And like I mentioned, just wonder, you may not have been there when I mentioned, it's probable, like somewhere around 75% probable at the moment, that I will be in Budapest on September 3rd and 4th. And then either before or after that, I may go to London or Berlin if we can actually get a couple or maybe more people from this community to get together and possibly meet each other face to face, shake hands, exchange hugs, have dinner. Let's see what happens. So I know that there's a group of people in London. There's also a group of people in Germany. So I guess those are natural places to try and plan something. But there might be other places as well. So I'm just open. I just wanted to see if that time frame might be something that people might consider. Okay. So we can talk about that some other time. And let me, before I launch into what I really want to do for today, were there any outstanding questions or concerns or objections stemming from last week's discussion about community of impact that you'd like to raise just for continuity so they don't get dropped? It might be good to at least ask that question, even if there's nothing, because I want to make sure that there's an opportunity to discuss that. Over. No? Okay, let me get into it then. Oh, one that I got just today is one outcome from last week's discussion is Doug listened to that session. And he reached out to me because he said, I have one leg of my peer relationship, and that's with Tammy. So, I have been doing this with Tammy for almost a year. But Doug actually has stepped forward to discuss whether we can actually, he and I together, be another part of this two-person peer mentoring kind of situation. So I'm going to have that discussion with Doug sometime soon. It'll be curious to me how that unfolds because it's not quite exactly what I had described last week, but I want to do it with Doug. I'm very motivated to do it with Doug because I wanted to get his sense on how this thing might be practiced and be implemented and how it might change both of us or possibly even the community. So that's a quick update I wanted to give you guys. Okay, here's what I wanted to discuss for today. Some people are tired, or I just got a note from Lucy. Did you see this note from Lucy? She won't be able to make it today. That's unfortunate. But Lucy, in case you're watching this later, I'll miss you. And hopefully you can join us some other time. I guess a friend has a 70th birthday party. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to reference is this notion of shared memory. Now, this is fundamental because if you don't believe in shared memory, everything I'm about to say the rest of today is not going to make sense. I want to bring up this question of shared memory because for a community to exist, whether it's a culture, a city, a town, a village, a team, a sport team, a club, a sewing group, a coffee group, whatever it is, for a group to exist, I think there needs to be some way that they share what they do, what they agree on. So at minimum, that set of agreements sits in something that I can potentially say is shared memory. So I would say even in this group, there's shared memory in Facebook. There's shared memory in the videos that are being recorded. There's shared memory in the texts, notes that have been taken. There's shared memory in the blogs that we've been creating. And it's bewildering, although, see, we're at two extremes. We can let people produce content wherever they want to produce content, or we can agree up front on exactly where that content is going to be produced. I actually more strongly favor the do it wherever you like model, because otherwise, if we impose constraints and guidelines early, people find it too difficult. And I've seen this happen in so many teams over and over and over again. Hey, Alex, welcome. So in order to get people to feel free to express, I don't think we should put limitations on what they say and where they say it, or who they send it to. But what's difficult about that is then, how are we going to find it? So to me, this whole idea of shared memory is, how do you find and organize and reuse that which has been shared among us, either verbally or in written form or in video form, whatever, okay? And so, again, specifying where we go up front, say, oh, everybody should use Google Docs, or everybody should use WordPress, or everybody should use Microsoft, just feels too prescriptive. You know, it's just very antithetical to what this community has seemed to agree on, what is emergent. So the minute somebody says you must use XYZ, it stops and it blocks some people. Obviously enables some others. You know, there's been a strong move recently towards WordPress. And so I, right now, at this moment, err on the side of what some people might call anarchy. In other words, do whatever you want, wherever you want to do it, but just do something. And if you share it with enough people, then the difficulty of finding and the difficulty of reusing is going to cause some of this merging to happen. You know, more and more people are going to say, well, this is a good thing, so we're going to try and use this. But I don't want to do that up front. I want to support what everybody's doing. So Josh right now is proposing WordPress. I don't mind using it, so I'm actually trying it right now. I've created 2 WordPress addresses in the last few weeks, so I'm trying it. Historically, though, my stuff has been in Google Docs, it has been in SoundCloud for the audio recordings, and it has been in YouTube for the video recordings. And for whatever blogs I've written, they're scattered all over the place, but many of them right now are on kfjournal.org. What's important for me, though, is to create an index, kind of a front page, so that if I care about Alex's contributions, I can actually link to Alex's contributions. If I care about Gertrude's, I can link to Gertrude's. If I care about Glenn's, I can link to them. And I'm going to have my version of my front page of what GCC is all about. I know Heiner already has this. Heiner has baking.de. But for us to upfront agree that this is everything, I think feels very restrictive. So I want to introduce, by that little monologue, this notion of shared memory, okay? And I really want you guys each to, you know, give me what you think, because I feel strongly that shared memory is so crucial for us to move forward that I might not be seeing something. And I want you to, you know, just hit me between the eyes if I'm not seeing something. Because to me, having gone almost a year and not having some of these facilities makes it almost impossible to move forward. Yes, Jaswinder.
There were only 3 of us yesterday, and we were discussing more or less what you're saying now. Joshua even went so far as to take my postcode and blow up a Google map so he could see what I was talking about my immediate surroundings, the area I live in. That aside, my personal input on this one, excuse me, I'm sucking chocolate, is that if we do not have a shared background, we cannot move forward. I think we discussed this about 6 months ago, and we've reiterated it a few times. And each and every society that wants to go forward has to have this shared background. Moreover, the phraseology, the ideology of our language has to be shared as well, and that has to cut across the gender gap as well as the age gap and whatever else there is, so that when we use a phrase, we know more or less exactly what we mean, and everybody can build on that phrase and not somebody have to question that at some time or other. I'll give you, for example, which I gave yesterday, which is the phrase I keep hearing now and again, is we're all individuals. And I went back to Mr. Spock in the Dr. Spock in the 60s, who said that we were all the same. So we've gone from one spectrum of the ideology that we're all the same to the other extent, we're all individuals. And I don't know what either of those two really mean other than what people are saying. So I am totally with you. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so I do apologize for missing yesterday's conversation. If this feels like a regurgitation of yesterday's conversation, I apologize about that too. It's just hard for me to make meetings during the week.
There's no need for apologizing. If we're not clear on how we're going to move forward, if we're not clear on how we're going to relate to each other, then we're going to have a stop, start many, many times. If I would like to see all 15 of us, I think now, in one group, listening to you, or at least playing catch up with what you have to say sometime or other. This, to me, seems to be the most important point there is. The one you're making today, and the one we were making yesterday. Again, thank you for listening.
So, would anybody else like to respond? Because I do have, Gertrude.
When I'm listening to both of you, it's like it reminds me of the evolutionary purpose in the reinventing organizations thing. It feels like we started somewhere and sharing and this open way, and then there is over time there is a natural tendency to grasp what that is about and how does that unfold, and I can very much resonate with not just this is how we do it and everybody has to join in, but more like what wants to unfold, what kind of structure do we need, what kind of structure helps us to go forward. Not so much like, I was thinking about Kumu and this, it's not so much that everybody has to do the same, but they're able to connect. It feels like a forest is I mean, there is a tree here and a tree there, and then they merge together and then they exchange communication, and there is this whole field, but there is no one who says, okay, you have to go in line, except if that is economically used. So to have that sense, what kind of structure is really appropriate to what we do? And I think this sensing into this, not so much the thinking about it, and then find the right ways. And like Josh, who's really enthusiastically supporting us, I think that's a wonderful idea. And maybe we have some others. Like I'm just at the moment I'm moving from the open Google Drive to G Suite, and and this is, how can I say that? We have, before you're just used to something, and then you want to go to somewhere else, but it's like a hurdle in between. And going over that hurdle needs, I do need support. Otherwise I stay behind. And if I'm doing that, then afterwards it's easy. So I think overcoming that hurdle for moving forward is, there might be some support needed from those who know more and who can support the others, like Josh does.
Go ahead, Alex. I have a response too, but go ahead.
I think that's a learning curve. Gertrude was referring to when you jump from one system to another and you're not familiar with the new system, you've got a rather steep learning curve, unless you're well versed in the languages and whatever. But the other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll let you get back in, is that when the organisation is planning its movement forward, its path, it pays to have the clear idea about the objective. When the objective is clear in the minds of the participants, the path just seems to become clear by itself. It just seems to develop because everybody's focused on a similar, or everybody's clear about the objective. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, can I just build on that a little? I love that. Because my thoughts about this is somewhat in a similar direction, to bring in, well, to just get you up to speed, Doug. Sam mentioned shared memory, that he wants us to look into that today, and what could be the next steps of shared memory, which would be a natural thing in a community of impact. And it reminds me of what you said once about confederational purpose, and what you described was a group of people in different parts of the world who share one very huge purpose, which is a global purpose, which is sort of like a star in the sky. It's very big, it's not clearly defined, but it's important for all those people to feel one thing in common. And then there's the specific purposes of each person in a process where that's being clarified, so that it's a process to clarify each particular person's purpose, which can be informed, of course, by the whole process, which is an evolutionary process. And that then there's the totality of those purposes, which then will naturally show the direction. So that's one point. And more specifically concerning the shared memory, you mentioned before Doug came in here about you like the idea of anarchy, that to err on the side of anarchy, and at the same time something in common. The idea that's come forward seems to be that we can use many platforms, and we are using many platforms, and then these can be linked together, like Gertrude mentioned, so that what really matters is that it is possible to find one page with links to a lot of relevant material, and it could be many pages. So you can imagine a network where each person in the network picks their own platform, and in that platform they can also have links to the works of other people. And this is the idea of the co-creation, and this is what Josh has been talking about too, that this can be easily organized through WordPress. So, um, so if we can do that, I don't really see that there's any problem. Then it seems that the challenge is more for each person to decide what platform they personally want to use, as well as decide what material they personally want to write, and of course, what they won't have time to read and link from other people's material. So in that way, we could have a shared memory. And at the moment, we have the Zoom calls and the YouTube lists of those. We have the Facebook group. We have the GCC Messenger thread. We have the Sutra. We have the Basecamp, and we have the GCC webpage and associated blogs. Um, so to just sum up my main point is that what seems to really matter is to have at least one collection place for the bulk of the material, and preferably many. Yeah.
Maybe, can you hear me? Maybe I cry out and I whistle in the dark. I'm really, really concerned. I was here to hear about Sam, how to come to shared collective memory, how to maybe merge different collective memories and really have him talk. I always see so many other talks and I hear so many voices on co-creation and whatever. So I think this is a nuisance. If we don't get our things together that other people can follow up in the internet, that they can listen to the videos and not getting this half an hour, then we never get our stories together. I think we are here on a very strong way to make our video presentations who we are, maybe in 1:30. What is our urge, history, failings, longing, futures, maybe in 5 or 6 minutes. But like this, it is so unstructured.
I lost Heiner.
Yeah, I lost him too.
The last part of your sentence was not.
It's the pain I rip anyway, loud and over.
Well, this is why we focus. This is the focus session, and we focus on Sam, and we focus on the discussion, the outcomes. I guess what we were talking about, the outcomes, and whether or not there's an objective there that everybody's focused on, leading the group in the same, along the same path in the same direction. Otherwise,
well,
we're going.
I'm going to acknowledge Heiner's remarks in that in probably the last half hour or more of last week's session, I did feel that we did get off the topic a bit. And I don't fault anyone for doing that. I think that, people come here to try and contribute what they can. But it did feel like, the number of sessions that I will be presenting will probably increase if we do take such wide divergent conversation as we did last week. I don't want to hold the floor that long. I want to yield it to others. So in one way, by wanting to yield it, I want to focus so that I can yield it more quickly, if you understand what I mean. But the more we let it go, then it sounds like, oh, Sam's taking more and more sessions because it takes longer and longer for me to get some of these things out. And there's pros and cons. We've talked about that before. So yes, in that respect, Heiner, I do understand and do feel that concern as well. And I myself will try in other people's presentations to not take that conversation quite so broadly divergent, while at the same time still trying to insert some relevant comments and feedback as appropriate. That's the fine piece of judgment I think that we each need to be sensitive to. So in this idea, Doug, and I wanted to go back to this idea of shared memory. It really refers to what I think are really 8 or 9 key constructs. Now, I know that these ideas have been around for a while. I've exposed them, and it might feel a little pedantic, but I do feel that I haven't yet made the case for why these 8, to me, feel so necessary. All around being able to share memory. You can call it memory, you can share it culture, you can call it values, you can call it whatever you want. To me, I'm calling it memory. It's basically, what do we say to each other? What agreements do we make to each other? What do we agree to do together? And so, however you want to call that, I'm just using the word memory right now for that. And I wanted to send around one more time this list that I've been compiling for the last few months. That is one way of responding to Jaswinder's comment. Okay, Jaswinder was saying, you don't really have this. The shared culture, right? But if I look at the kind of language we use, I don't think we can be quite that assuming about how common we share some of this language. Take a look at some of these terms, you know? You can sort of see that in common everyday usage, if you were just to meet some random person on the street and look at what these terms mean, they're likely to be different than the way we use those terms, you know, ourselves here in this particular group. And there's already, what, many dozens, if not hundreds, of terms on that list that I've been sort of taking note of as we have these conversations. So how easy is it? How likely is it that we can actually have that precision of shared, common, accurate meaning without this long history of conversation? It's almost impossible, it seems to me. But that's what defines this particular group of us. Yeah, Jaswinder, Alex, I think both of you guys had your hands up.
Just wanted to mention that we stand on
I heard we stand on, and then I got lost.
Yeah, Alex was speaking and I was trying to speak at the same time. I think really the shortcut to this one is that we continue the conversations as they're occurring without stopping them. But when we come across a phrase that needs clarifying, and I think that anybody, I think you've already said this, that anybody can speak up at that time and say, I need some clarification on that one. And then once that's clarified, move on rather than do a whole big expounding on it. We just need to know that what the person who said the phrase or the quotation or whatever, what they mean by it, and then we can expound on it later without stopping the flow. That's probably the short answer from my point of view. Thank you.
Just have a very brief comment to what Heiner mentioned and about going off track. Last session, it should be mentioned that there was new people that came in towards the end of the session, and I think probably that's a situation that demands special care. And then, of course, in this session, as you said, Sam, you wanted us to sort of talk about, yeah.
It's gone.
And also shared memory. Like, isn't shared memory a prerequisite for any words to have meaning collectively?
To me, it is. Even language is part of shared memory, you know, because that shared meaning to even 20% or 50% or 80% or 99%, whatever amount is shared, is still part of what allows us to interact. If Jaswinder uses a Hindu term and I use a Taiwanese term, there's zero overlap and zero shared meaning there. And then we're going to have difficulty, right? But at the same time, I don't see us ever getting 100% on any specific term or phrase. Even the term anarchy means something different to me than it does to Josh, than it does to Doug, than it does to Gertrude. Democracy, same thing. Not to mention a word like love. What does love mean? Do we even share 100% overlap on what that means? You know? So that's why my response is, I don't think we can get to that level, but we need to understand explicitly when we cannot get to that level. The error is when we assume we can get to that level and just sort of say, okay, we'll get there. Because that's what creates misunderstanding and therefore disappointment and causes, hurt feelings, is when we assume that we understand each other. I'm going to try and bring up George Bernard Shaw, right? Wasn't it he who said, the remarkable thing about communication is that we think it ever happens? It's so hard because, from one meeting like this to the next one or from the previous one, how much do we actually retain? Yeah, Doug, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm curious. You started to say within this construct of shared memory, there are 8 or 9 key constructs.
Yes.
Is this, so word shared language is one of them?
Yes. In other words, this notion. Yeah, go ahead.
What I wanted to ask, if it would be okay, is could you also share that you feel like you've never really been able to articulate the whole package? Could you give us sort of the 30,000 foot of the 8 or 9 elements of this as a complete sort of meme package?
Yes. Yes. In fact,
before we go down the individual ones as rabbit holes, I'd really appreciate being on the receiving end of you saying that's the whole shebang, and then turn back and go, okay, this one, that one, or the other, if that would be okay.
Thank you, Doug. That is really a welcome intervention and suggestion, and I really appreciate that. So I'm going to send you a link. I'm going to give you guys a link to a page. It's actually a blog that I wrote several years ago, and I know some of you have seen it before. It's on a site called kfjournal.org, and I'm going to find it, kfjournal.org. I'm going to search for myself, and I'm going to find this thing called 8 artifacts. Okay, now I'm going to send the link to this chat. And I'm going to share it with you all. Here it is. Okay, so this article that I just sent the link to has what I think are 8 essential minimal artifacts / tools that to me can help a team form and then start actually acting like a team or community or project or club, put in whatever word you like. But any group of people that's going to have some shared meaning wants to consider these things, okay? So the first one is who is who. Sounds so simple, but we don't even know who is who. The only list we have right now is the members in the Facebook group. And there's very little information there about each one of us. However, certain of us that have taken the time to share more and create blogs and create our own domains actually have more. So to me, if we're actually going to know who's in the community, we need to know at least the names and some other little metadata about them. And so that's item number 1 is, how do we even address each other, name each other, identify each other, even send something to someone, okay? Minimum. These are all obvious. To me, they're so obvious, but I want to just go through the first 8 and then go into a discussion about them, okay? 2 involves language. In other words, the terms, the phrases, the different meanings, and that's why I sent you guys that list earlier, is that if we don't actually explicitly call out what we mean when we say anarchy, or when we say agreement, or when we say meeting, or when we say emergent, if we don't really understand that in our context, then I think we're setting ourselves up for disappointment, okay? We don't have to spend 100% of our time on it, but in the normal course of conversation, when I hear someone use a term that I'm hearing is a little bit different than the way I've previously used it, I would like to put it in that list. Because the way it's useful is when there is more than one interpretation of a word or a phrase, because that's an invitation to some clarification. But if we don't note those things, and we just assume we mean the same thing, then that disappointment is going to hit the project or the team in the collaboration at a late stage, when it's typically more expensive to address it. So that's number 2, the glossary. Yeah, Alex.
Do you think it would be worthwhile having an initiation for newcomers, an onboarding experience for newcomers, where they are introduced to those links and expressions and expected to familiarise themselves with that before coming fully into the organisation as participants and engaging in the chat session?
Could we postpone that discussion after having gone through all?
Okay.
Not forget it.
Yeah, Alex, I do agree with you, but yeah, let's see if we can get through some of this and then get into its derivative ideas, okay? So item number 3 for me is, why are we here? It's, that thing that people sometimes call a charter or a constitution, or, a declaration or a manifesto, or a vision statement or a mission statement or a value statement. Why are we here? I know, and I stated last week, and even the previous week, why I think I'm here, okay? But I am not in a position to say that applies to everybody. I'm clearly not in a position to do that. And I think each of us is in a position to say why you're individually here. But how does that serve, in this idea of onboarding, how does that serve someone new coming to this group? There is confusion there, because Tammy will have a statement, you'll have a statement, I'll have a statement, but is there a way for an emergent why to take shape out of these individual statements of why? My belief is that over time, over behavior, over conversations, some key memes will emerge. It's not my place to say what it is up front. It's not, maybe it's someone else's, but I don't take that responsibility. I don't take that power, because I do think that each person has an opt-in to that particular why. Number 4 is a tricky one. In normal organizations, in what others or Doug might call the industrial frame or the current paradigm, it's called, how do we engage with each other? How are those rules of conduct? Do we agree to meet? Do we agree to make decisions? Do we agree to execute action? Do we agree to manage assets? Do we agree to manage liability? Do we agree to manage purpose? All of those kinds of things. And for me, I would like to see that be emergent as well. I don't think I'm, again, in any position to impose any rules of engagement on anyone. But I think all of us ought to be free to propose and then see if there's agreement, okay? So my particular way of proposing how we engage with each other is in these form of mini how-tos. Okay, so to me, a how-to is take one very, very, very small thing, like how do we record videos and share them, okay? So in fact, that is a how-to that exists. Lucy has contributed to it, Tammy has contributed to it, I've contributed to it. There's at least 3 co-authors, if not more. And there is a how-to that says this is the way we actually record and share media. I've identified a dozen others at least. One is, how do we welcome new people to this particular group? Another is, how do we even decide who's active? That might be an obvious one, but try writing that one up. Another one is, how do we contribute? Actual money, if we want to do that. Another one could be, how do we even call another meeting? There's 4 every week, but there's other meetings that can be done. And people coming new might say, hey, I've got a great topic that might need some weekly conversation and energy and attention and focus. Maybe it's not obvious to that new person how to do that. So rather than write a big monolithic, 14-point charter that says this is how we do things, I'm actually much more interested in these little micro agreements. Because these micro agreements can address very, very small things and then be revised independently. They will link and associate and relate to others. But they don't have to be big monolithic things. They can be very, very small. And by the way, if you have access to Slack, starting about last October or December, I've put a bunch of those how-tos there. And now I've started migrating some of them to Google Docs. So some of you have access to the GCC shared Google folder on Google Drive. There is a subfolder there called how-tos or GCC how-tos. And in there, one document there is the index of how-tos. And that index points to a few of the how-tos that exist, but it also names a number of how-tos that are not yet written. So you can sort of see the sort of things that I'm suggesting are how-tos that we might want to write or someone might want to write. Okay.
Just one question to that.
Yeah.
Do you, these micro agreements, are these between certain members of the group, or are you thinking GCC as a whole?
So that question has to do with how do we decide that there is actually a decision being made. That's actually another how-to that I've written. In other words, how do we decide? How do we propose something? How do we gather feedback on it? How do we see whether or not the preponderance of support is much greater than the degree of conflict and disagreement? And then over some time, if there's a stability to the proposal, then perhaps in some sense we could call it adopted. But yet again, it's only a proposal until some of us provide feedback and support for it. If there's no feedback and support, then there's only my proposal for it, and then it just sort of sits there, and it's not actually embraced or adopted by anybody. So what I'm suggesting is a set of micro-agreements that people can themselves opt in to either say, hey, that makes sense, let me also record video the same way, let me share video the same way. Because that's a decision I can easily make, because I could decide, conversely, I could decide to put things on Vimeo, right? As a much better idea. So there might be an opportunity to actually say, here's a better way. And that's a lot of the value of having a how-to, is that someone could actually point to it and say, I can improve this. And then we can engage in that conversation about how to improve it. And that's the learning process within a group. Obviously, there will be some people that like the old way, some people that like the new way. There's a conversation to be had there.
So is it
but
like
if we don't actually have it written down, we can't really have that conversation. Or worse, we have that conversation many times.
So is it like an option like an interesting option.
Yeah, I do think so. In these communities where nobody's in charge and I'm not paying anybody and nobody's paying me, there's no central authority. It's always a matter of individual opt-in. You vote with your feet, you vote with your keyboard, and you actually say, this is what I would support, this is what I will not support. Nobody can force me to support something, and I can't force anyone to support anybody else, other than by the merit of the ideas and the merit of the discussion. And if those discussions don't take place, then I cannot influence you on that, and you cannot influence me either. And that's why I think these artifacts are important. They provide an invitation to a conversation. It's also an invitation to learning. And it's an invitation how to do things continuously better in some way. Yeah, Doug, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just I'm wondering, I get this in the how-to frame as sort of an emergent reflection codification of practices that one person over here, another person over there is in their wheelhouse. They've been executing, they evolve or develop, whatever they evolve and develop. And I get that as a reflection, actually mapping back up to your sort of collective memory, right? I'm not sure what the add-in of the agreement nomenclature or rubric attached to that, whether that's required or what the reason is for your adding that characterization or flavor on top of it. And we you don't have to answer that now, but it arises for me because it actually it evokes a whole different thing, and I'm not quite sure whether it's necessary. Like, so whether that necessarily has to be stirred into the construct for the construct to stand and work in the frame of somebody develops a practice, posts a how-to, and everybody sort of programmatically who has a need turns to it when they need to learn how to and to do. And so it's sort of progression by explicit behavioral and tacit agreement. Yes, in the sense that somebody's going, works for me, I'm doing it, right? But is the agreement component a necessary explicit dimension or artifact of that? If nobody raises it, it's sort of like, so that's my question.
Could I ask you the same question as I did with Alex? To just postpone it till we are through the 8.
Yeah, no, I put it on the boards just because I wanted to register it. And as I said, I have no problem moving on with the rest of the list.
It's a great question.
We can come back. It's just to get the whole concept and then dive in.
Yeah. So thanks for the question, Doug. It's a great question. I do want to get back to it, but thanks also, Gertrude, for allowing me to sort of proceed breadth first, and then we'll go into some of these little rivulets of separate conversation. Okay? So let's at least say for now that this rules of engagement component, this number 4 idea, for me in this community, not in every community, but in this community, takes the form of these little mini how-tos, mini agreements. And I understand the agreement word is something to be discussed, but let's push off that conversation. The 5th, which is really kind of like what most people think of when they think of memory, is the chronologue. It's basically what happened so that we can actually recall it. Okay? And that, to me, in one form, are these videos. The notes are a chronologue as well. But in a chronologue really implies this kind of searchable by time. In other words, if I'm going to go back and say, what happened in October of 2017, I ought to be able to find it easily. Okay, so that's the notion of a chronology. Everything happens sorted and ordered by time. And by that, I really mean everything, right? Because everything that's shareable ought to be accessible in that way. Okay, now, item number 6. We haven't gotten here yet, but almost any team that takes on a set of actions wants to know that those actions are being performed. They want to know who's doing it, when it can be done, who can support it if it's needing some help. So it's another simple notion, but how do you track what's being done? On a very sophisticated level, in the current paradigm, it's project management. At even a greater level, it's logistics management. But in a micro level, at small teams, and in fact, and even one-on-one, it's these little action items like, hey, you're going to pick up some milk for me this afternoon. Okay, that's a little action item. Are you going to call the dentist? That's an action item. Okay, and if it doesn't get done, my teeth hurt. 2 weeks from now, right? So we want to know that these things get done, and we want to know that we don't have to keep bothering somebody to know that it's being done. So that's what I'm calling this action item tracking system. Okay. The 7th is this calendar idea, which is how do you manage what's going to come up in the future? So it's related to the chronology, but the chronology is, what's actually happened, and you can actually think about everything that's happened in the past. But the calendar is the flip side of that, which is how do we plan? Like, how do we know we're going to have a conversation next Friday, next Thursday? How do we know we're going to have a website up within 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, right? So that's the calendar side of things. And then number 8 is this notion of references. We don't exist in a vacuum. At the very minimum, there was something that stimulated creation of this group, which was the Global Challenges Foundation. So they have a proposal. So there's actually material and references and thinking and artifacts and documents and articles and pages that we did not create, right? They give us context, and we relate to those things. So you can call this a library, but it can be a bookshelf, whatever, a set of links. But it's, how do we make sense of everything else that gives us context and maybe helps us do what we want to do? Now, I've actually myself been intending to modify this to 9. Okay, so the 9th artifact, and I'm going to be a bit unfair and actually just name it right here, is the shared conversation space. The conversation space, to me, is not just Zoom. It's how do you carry a conversation by who said what and what's responding to what in not just video form, not just verbal form, but also in written form. Facebook has been that for us. I am actually quite dissatisfied with the way Facebook does it because I can't find many things, many threads that I want to respond to until I see that somebody else has already responded, and then it pops back up on my radar. And if that doesn't happen, if I say, hey, I want to respond to something Gertrude said 4 weeks ago, it's very hard for me to find, usually. Okay. However, it is by default our current shared conversation space outside of these video conversations. So I'm going to modify this particular blog entry and call it 9 artifacts because I do think that each of these things helps us organize what we've said, helps minimize the number of times we have to revisit these certain topics, these certain conversations that seem to take place, maybe multiple times, maybe more times than we want, simply because they're not recorded and not shareable. I know the whole issue of, I was impatient in January. I wanted to sort of see some progress, etc. Tammy's mentioned that, right? But if we actually don't have that written down, shared in such a way that somebody like Steven Kreutzer can come and actually see, oh, we had this conversation back in January, then it might actually just happen again. And like some of us have experienced when, Esteban came here and maybe others, we've had similar re-asking of some common questions. Now, maybe that's appropriate, because in a spiral form, you always know the topic differently every time you revisit it. But it might be tiring for those that don't want to hear the same conversation every single time. There might be some way to say, first look at this, and if it's necessary, then let's improve that. But let's not always have the same conversation that takes 30 minutes every single time. So that's my very broad, quick tour through these 8/9 artifacts that, to me, I institute for every project, every community, every team that I am responsible for. I've actually done this, at work for just about every project. And I am in no position to impose this on GCC. I am only in a position to suggest it as a way to consider how it might assist our conversations, perhaps even our learning, perhaps even our sharing, perhaps even our alignment. So with that, I'm going to actually close my opening tour through these 9 artifacts, and pause for a second. And if no questions directly apply, then let's go back to some of those deferred topics that Alex and Doug and others raised.
Just one short question. What's the difference between 8 and 9? References and shared conversation space. Isn't that kind of the same thing?
Okay, sorry. Conversation space to me is just like, suppose we didn't have Zoom. Suppose all we had was text messaging. We could actually set up a text messaging area for just onboarding, for example. We could set up a text messaging area for just greeting people, like in everybody's initial contributions, like what we're doing on Fridays. We could set up another area for, let's call it, the mission of GCC, or pick your favorite topic. And in that way, you would have kind of this time-sorted, linear form of conversation, text conversation, which to me is actually quite valuable, because these things are searchable, they're referenceable, you can link to them. So if something interesting got said, or if some interesting decision got made at some point, you can actually link to that. And then that kind of eliminates the need to have that conversation again, or at least to have that conversation starting from a known good understanding, rather than from ground zero. Does that make sense, Glenn?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I think the others have a lot of questions here too. So let's go into it.
So unless there's more questions about these specific 8, now wait a minute. I have actually talked about this probably at least 2 or 3 times within GCC, right? Let me get back to a different way of having these conversations, which is, how does this land on you guys? What are you feeling when you see these things? Does it feel restrictive? Does it feel prescriptive? Does it feel like it might help us? Does it feel like it might, structure some of our conversations so we waste less time? Or does it feel too limiting? Is it too much a set of boundaries that one might be uncomfortable with? I'm really curious to see how this lands, because some people get it. Some people, find difficulty with it. And I really do want to understand that. I really do, because I want to learn myself how to make this more useful.
Okay, I have one impression, which is quite clear, and that is that all of this seems to be very interesting options for a community like this. Some of them could be general rules, but some of them seem more to be directed towards smaller teams, so people working on specific projects. So I feel that we're moving maybe between slightly different resolutions, or so that's one question comes to me, is sort of where the area of resolution you're at, Is it the small specific project-based team of these individuals who actually want the same thing, or are we more speaking about the broader GCC, which is sort of more like a meeting place? Yeah, that's the first thing that sort of comes to me with this. That's sort of a blurry line where some of it seems more relevant for the one than the other.
So let me respond to that, if I may, first, Alex. And that is that I've always got my eye on the end game because our name includes this word global. You know, we don't shake that. You know, this is the GCC. It's a global challenges community. But I want to see how we get there. So these practices are how we can do things at one stage of our evolution. I don't think we're quite there yet because we actually have not decided to agree on this, right? So that's why we haven't done it. So we're at a stage right now where, believe it or not, and acknowledge it or not, but we have already made some agreements. We've agreed on certain meeting times during the week. We've agreed to use Zoom. We've agreed to use English. You know, we've agreed to have these durations of about 90 minutes to 150 minutes. You know, there are some agreements that we've already made. We've agreed to wear clothes when we come to these meetings, you know. We've agreed to just show our heads to these meetings. You know, there's some implicit agreements already. So I think the idea of agreements has enabled these conversations. If I didn't agree to come on these Saturdays, we wouldn't be having these conversations, right? So agreements do help move things along. So this gets back to Doug's idea. I actually don't see agreement as a, and this is intentionally pokey, Doug, I don't see agreements as a dirty word. I don't see it as a triggering word. I see it as an enabling word. It's an enabling concept. In the way that, you know, hey, you know, if you and I both decide to kiss, you know, we both enjoy it. But nobody's saying you have to do this. You know, you're not imposing it on me. I'm not imposing it on you. But it's opt-in. So we can agree to have these meetings on Thursdays or Fridays or Saturdays or Sundays. And that helps us achieve something that we both seem to like. So I don't think of commitment. I don't think of agreement as restrictive in the sense that I put my feet in concrete and I cannot extract it later on, right? I think that they're the best we know at the time. And it's like Maya Angelou, when you know better, do better. So these agreements are only as good as you know today, and they're invitations to do better tomorrow or this afternoon. So that's why I see agreements or commitments. Over.
Gertrude.
Gertrude, you're on mute.
Alex, I thought you were first.
I thought so also, Alex.
I just wanted to mention the global ground up movement, giving people options to opt in or opt out or to dictate their own level of participation. That's an open group community, and a pledge to be a part of the agreement. When you make a pledge to do something, I think if it's to be part of the global fabric ground up movement, it's a pledge to add two friends to the movement, encourage two friends, or keep inviting friends until two of them agree. And that's if they opt in other words, until two of them opt in to the pledge to the planet to join a GCC local district hub. Because these local district hubs have great power and wonderful things to develop community and cohesion. And back to Gertrude.
It took me some time to realize why I was like resistant to many of agreements or to the word integrity. And I really worked on that with a coach, because I was working for an organization where integrity is, without integrity nothing works, and it was like, oh my God, you don't have integrity, and then I realized that there are people that don't have an emotional load with it, and they just can make agreements and break them or not, or and then oh sorry, I did that, and then they go forward. And then there are other people like me, I presume some others, that have that emotional load, is as if you have to do it, and if you don't do it you get punished, or you have to emigrate to New Zealand from my part. So I think, like when you say I don't think it's a bad word, I don't either, but I know that I have an emotional load with it. Maybe a lighter now, but so there is not, it's good or not, but some people really react to that. And so as soon as something like it's imposing, I cannot get out of it, I have to, things like that, if they come with it, then just go back. And just when Alex said a pledge to, oh, yeah, so so I think we have to take that into account, and not just the content. Yeah, and I have several ideas to the different.
Can I respond to that one first and then ask you about the others? So, Gertrude, if we were living in the same house and I said, I'm going to go out and get some milk and I'll be back by 3 o'clock. And if 3:15 or 3:30 comes by and I call you and say, hey, Gertrude, you know, there's too much traffic, I can't get home in time. Have I lost integrity? Really? Because I didn't do what I said I was going to do. I'd be curious to see what each of you think about that. You know, Doug, Glenn, you know, Alex.
Well,
in that case, have I lost integrity?
If you don't call and don't come home in time, and I don't have milk because I want you to do something and you say you did. So if I don't know it, and if you don't call me, then for me it's a difference to give me feedback as soon as you know you cannot make it.
Right. So intentionally I said at 3:15 or 3:30 I call. I could have known before 3 o'clock, right? So I could have called you at 3:50 or 3:45. Yeah. Would I be more integrity if I called you at 2:45 versus if I called you at 3:30?
Yeah.
That's it. There's degrees of integrity. And it's like...
So the minute you think there's degrees of integrity, then it's kind of an interesting spectral conversation.
You know that yin and yang symbol where the line waves through the center in a curve, and it's a very specific division between the black and the white. When I look at it, I think sometimes that line is grayed. It's a grayed line between the black and the white. It's not a sharp line, it's grayed out. So it's merging. One side's white, one side's dark. You know what I mean? But the yin and yang symbol is still there, and you can see it. There's a degree of integrity in how we behave and how we respect each other, how we treat each other, and what expectations we have for the way others treat us.
But, you know, I do resonate a lot with what Gertrude says. I've been in these groups, these workshops, these communities in the self-help or success, you know, domain, where, boy, if you show up at 9:01 when you said you're going to show up at 9 o'clock, all of a sudden people can't trust you anymore. You know? I've been in those communities. And I've had to learn how to re-like myself even though I was late at some of those meetings.
But
Difficult, you know?
one question here is, why make the agreements explicit? I mean, because that question came up in one of the Thursday conversations, and you weren't there, Sam, but we came into this with agreements, and some agreements are implicit. So like if we say, if you send me a message and we will you be at the Zoom call today, and I say yes, then that is effectively an agreement. So we don't have to write it out as an agreement. We just do the agreement, and then we maybe honor it or not. So, but the question that came up was, why do these agreements need to be written down on a sort of front page, let's say? Because that's maybe when the reaction will come. And if so, which agreement could be relevant to write down on a front page and which could not? Because I feel this list is far more detailed than what would be appropriate on, let's say, the front page of this leaflet you mentioned.
Okay, I would like a chance to actually answer that, okay? And that is that even between two people, if we make an agreement, we're not the only two people affected, okay? So let me go back to the milk example, okay? If Gertrude needed the milk because she wanted to make cookies, then maybe my kids would be affected if I was late, right, delivering the milk. So almost in any decision or actions, there's not just the direct participants, but there's also the beneficiaries and what I call the victims. Third parties, who are affected by whether or not a decision or an action takes place. And these are people who actually get the ripple effects of whether an action or a decision was actually made or executed. So if you believe that the ripple effects are not major, yeah, perhaps you don't need to explicitly share it. But if my kids really wanted cookies at 4 o'clock and I was not there at 3 o'clock with the milk, they would be affected. Now the question is that a big deal? So I think it's not just agreements are not just between two people. They're always in a larger context, in my opinion, potentially.
I was thinking about a situation where the person bringing the milk home was late, but when they did arrive 10 minutes late, they had the milk and they also had a big tub of ice cream.
Yeah, a good friend of mine actually said, never be the person who's late to a meeting. Always be the person who brings donuts.
But I still feel it's a little unclear, this, because, yeah, of course it affects others, but if you, for example, take Glossary, and that is so vague, even among us, even for me, the same word has a different meaning, many different meanings, depending on what mood I'm in. So that may be one example of something which clearly would just be a sort of reference, suggestion, or maybe interesting reading material or something, but couldn't be an agreement that these words mean this and that for this. For example, seems like one of those things which, yeah.
Can I give you one example that affected me, actually? Or Gertrude, why don't you go first?
No, you.
Okay. I recall probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks ago, Anna's daughter-in-law had a medical condition that Anna was trying to support. And a number of people, especially you, Gertrude, sent healing energy and were sending love. And a number of other people who were doing this with Sandy, I think it was her name. And this went on for days. And I'm there thinking, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what sending energy, I don't know what sending healing energy really involves. I mean, I could pretend to do it. I could envision these purple globes of light and love, you know, encircling the planet. I could actually be thinking about somebody. I could be thinking of Anna. I could actually be loving her. I could actually be trying to embrace her virtually. I could do all those things, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. So I don't really understand these notions. I was not trained in these light worker arts, you know? I'm even learning that terminology. And yet, I send best wishes, I send love, I send, you know, thoughts. Does that count? You know?
Yes.
Does that do anything? We use different words. We use different frameworks. We use different belief systems. We use different energy systems. But are we really that different, or are we fundamentally very different? I still don't know. That's an example that applies to me.
There's an old saying I strongly believe in, that is that actions speak louder than words. And I believe it's also applicable to thoughts generate intentions. And if they're directed at somebody who's ill, maybe that person finds out about that intention and heals the love. And their ego increases, their self-esteem increases, their immunity increases, and the ability to fight the disease increases.
I mean, yes, I can accept those words, and I can even accept the framework in which those words are actually constructed. You know, my mental, intellectual side says, if Anna had never spoken to Sandy, and we did exactly the same things, you know, Gertrude, Tammy, others had sent that healing energy, would Sandy have felt it? I don't know. Maybe she would have. You know?
Animals do.
You know, Gail has a stomach upset today. You know, she had stomach upset yesterday. If I don't tell her, but 3 or 4 of you actually decide to send healing energy to Gail, but I don't tell her it's happening, would she feel it? I don't know.
Well, it would have some impact, I would suppose, even if we can measure it. This is maybe a little straying a little here and there, but that's okay.
Well, there's the same question. Do we have an agreement? So I don't do it if I don't have permission. So that's why I have to ask first. If somebody's unconscious, if it's an animal or young children, you don't have to ask, but other people you need to ask, not for just sending love, but if you really work specifically.
If a tree falls in the
condition. Pardon?
Sorry, Gertrude. I was just saying, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, did it make any noise?
Of course it makes a noise.
Of course it did. That's when we go ahead.
The chicken and the egg came together. Sam, in
I'd like to come back to your 8 or 9 artifacts. Sam.
Actually, there's multiple people speaking at the moment.
Very quick retort to what Sam is getting at. Does prayer work with or without knowledge of the recipient? There have been many situations throughout history where peoples have become enslaved, and those peoples have prayed for a Messiah. And lo and behold, sooner or later, usually later, some hundreds of years later, a Messiah appears. If that kind of telepathy, if that kind of information relay, if that kind of memory does not go from point A to way back to a point where a Messiah is being prepared, we might as well pack our bags and go home. Because the butterfly effect, because what you say, what I say, because of me looking for you and you looking for me, we are sitting here. So when Mr. Trump says, my thoughts and prayers are with the bereaved, yes. Whether they would receive them in the spirit sent or not is entirely up to them. They have been sent. So Alex very kindly has pointed out, thought is an intention, kind of like putting the indicator down on your vehicle. I intend to move to the left. If you do not, if you walk into a bank and you think, I'd like to rob this bank, seems easy enough, and do nothing about it and walk out, you can't be arrested. Nobody knows about it. But that thought exists. That thought at some time or other could be acted upon. It's kind of like in my younger days when I would see a good-looking young girl and I would have a thought about it and maybe never act upon it. And then I would think, I should have acted upon it. I could have just said, hello, how are you? Even if I did get a slap. Telepathy does exist. And again, it's kind of like the other thing we were discussing. It has degrees. And sometimes, like the friend I visited today, he said, I was only thinking about you last week. 5 years I haven't seen him. All of a sudden I decide this morning, I'm going to go visit him. Whether he's there or not, I don't know, but I'm going to knock his door. And he was thinking about me last week. I'm a great believer in this telepathic path. I'm also a great believer in that the information we store in this lifetime, what we do, and some of the sages have written this down, goes back to where we came from. Otherwise, we wouldn't have messiahs. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Maybe this is connected to shared memory. I mean, it feels a little straying, but I guess we are talking about shared memory because each action creates a kind of memory trace in the world. I guess what we're talking about. But to sort of channel it a little back to the point you mentioned, Sam, that I get out of it is the personal actions we take, they matter, obviously. So even if we don't know how they matter.
It happens lots of times. I can give you instances of where, looking aside, if you take the House of Parliament, Westminster House, this is where the British Parliament sits. That particular place is a house of prayer. Right next to that is a church. And I've visited both places in one day. It's very easy to do. And that church, the head priest of the English church, who's directly appointed by the Queen, he does prayers every day. Now the difference between those two houses of prayer is the ones where the MPs sit, including the Prime Minister, they pray about something and then they write it down, and then in a few days' time it becomes an act, a law, if you like, and then if anybody who breaks that particular act is liable to a fine, let's say £1,000. And on the other side, you've got people who come together and they pray for peace, but they're not prepared to back it up. They don't go out of the church with banners flying saying, we want peace, don't make any more armaments, we're going to sit in front of the factories. Intention, when it leads to action, is a direct prayer answered there and then. Otherwise, you might as well wait for a Messiah in a 400 years' time. God will send one. I know that one too. Thank you.
If an angel of light appears in the future, the religious Christians will kill it because they said Satan will appear as an angel of light.
Whether Satan comes as an angel of light, it's his intention that's important. What's he coming to do? Is he coming to do what God demanded of him? or is he going to come and do what he wants to do? Two different things. And why did God allow an angel of death to become the Satan anyway? That takes me on into a completely different field of thought, because I researched that in Christianity that Christ was preaching, there is reincarnation. Why was reincarnation taken out at the Nicaea conference some 400 years later? I don't know. And do you know, I haven't heard anybody answer that one so far, because it obliged, because the Roman Emperor Constantine wanted...
I do have a problem where actually it's an interesting topic, and somehow I miss the connection. Glenn was trying to bring the connection to what we were talking about, the artifacts.
Like Alex did, and we go off on a tangent, I do feel obliged to try and clear that up as well, so that Alex gets a better view of the collective understanding. So that if this ever comes up again, and I can point to Alex and say, that's come up before, Alex, and the answers are there, should we care to look for them? I'll stop there and leave it open.
Intention, maybe, is a connection. Intention, yeah.
I would like to come back to what Sam said.
I can't hear you anymore.
Just at the beginning, anything. It's more evolving over time, where those get for vegetarians, sorry, but more flesh on the bone. So that this is more the bones, like kind of a contact list. A Facebook group is a contact list per se, so to say, but not with telephone numbers and pipapo. But so they're minimal things at the beginning, and then they get more and more and more, to the extent that's suitable. Think, that it's good for the purpose. And even what are we here for? You specifically said it's not right from the beginning that we say, okay, this is where we're heading, this is where everybody has to agree to, and things like that. But over time, it kind of becomes clear what it is about. And then at a specific time, maybe we will write it down. But it doesn't mean we have to do it right now. And so, in this sense, for me, those 8 or 9 make sense, a lot of sense. And it's more like it's observable that from an eagle's point of view, you can see that for functionality, it's necessary to know who the people are you're working with, have what Dave Logan would say, deterministic screens, kind of a sense where you're together, and some kinds of how we do it, some kind of minutes, and a basic tracking system, the calendar, and also useful links. So for me, it's like, yeah, of course. And the way how to do it, and to what extent, and what depth, in what detail, and how written and how fixed it should be, I think that's disputable. And what I said earlier is that for some people that has emotional load, the more clear and dense and written and committed it becomes. And it doesn't mean, for me, it doesn't mean it shouldn't exist, but I know my sweet spots in that. So, and I hear it often when Anna speaks. Yeah. So I just want to say that.
I appreciate that recap, Gertrude. I would actually say there's an interesting conversation that would kind of bifurcate. You know, there's people to whom this kind of makes sense. And then that conversation might go towards, okay, so what do we want to use for calendar? Do we want to use Google Calendar? Do we want to use, Trello for action item tracking? All that, specifics, okay? Then there's another group that says, this doesn't feel right, this feels imposed, I think it's too much, or, I think it's not enough, and want to stay. I still don't understand it philosophically. So there's two ways this conversation can go. Both are welcome to me because I will learn in both of those conversations. I wanted to introduce, as part of today, two of those in kind of specific form. One is that list of words, phrases in the glossary that I already kind of introduced to you guys because I've done this over a period of weeks. And I'm hoping you can see that there's some interesting terms there which could take some variety of meanings. And not all of them, of course, have any definitions offered, but you can see already that perhaps, one or two of us in the group might have different ways of using some of those terms. I'm going to paste another link in here, and that is to the index of how-tos that currently exists in Google Docs. Now, those of you that do not have Slack may not be able to click through to some of these documents, but there's at least a couple here that you can click on to sort of get a sense of what's there. So the first thing that you'll see in this index of how-tos is that I just sort of put down what I think my purpose is for these how-tos, and it says, short of having a charter, mission, values, manifesto, destination, rules of engagement, guidelines, or behavior, or suggestions on interaction, this index and referenced how-tos are a bootstrapped, starting from simplest possible basics way of attempting to form and attract adoption around how this community's members might want to do things and be together in some as yet undefined optimal way. So that's my preamble to the index of how-tos. So it goes on further to say, this and all artifacts and objects in this community are subject and amenable to improvement at any time. That's the whole learning idea, okay? There may be even a how-to. In fact, I started to write a how-to about that. So my request here around this is to consider it, review it. Is this the simplest possible kind of expression for how we do things? Let me avoid the word agreement. Is it a how-to expression that seems to make sense? Now on the next page, actually it's 2 pages following, are some proposed how-tos. There's a how-to on how to find a how-to. There's a how-to on how to create a how-to. And that actually is one that I spent a lot of time on. So if you click through on this thing of how to create a how-to, it talks about the components of how-tos and why you might want a how-to. So this is kind of a self-referential how-to in that it might be a little bit confusing and recurring for you to actually read this. But if you can get through that, you can get through pretty much all the other ones. Okay.
I just have a little question.
Yeah.
And that is, let's say that we get this repository to one collection place for the material of all the most active members. Let's say it's easy to use. Let's say you see the name Sam Hahn, you see this document and maybe a few others, what you consider most important. And then let's say some of us engage more in it than others, and some say, yes, I really like that formulation, I want to use that too, and it can get more specific. And then others, they're doing other things. And So yeah, what do you think about that?
I think that's going to be natural. I expect that. I do not expect everybody to see that this makes sense. I'm just hoping a few people try it. And those few people, if I get to interact with them, will make this better. And we will learn. And maybe at some point, we'll make it good enough that other people who did not initially like this might find it usable. That's what I'm hoping for.
And that's a hope I really resonate with, and I feel that that's maybe something many people would like for their ideas. So if we could have a system for that, makes a lot of sense. But then it needs this one repository. That's the point. That's what we're missing today.
Maybe. As long as the index points to it wherever it exists, I think it's findable. Let me say one more meta comment about this, okay? At all points in this thread of thinking, I've always had this GCF objective in mind, which is what is a potential path that we might be able to take towards constructing global governance models? And rather than posing something, I'd like to sort of seed ideas that are then opt-in, that are proactive on the part of the individual to adopt or not. And if these things make sense, then more and more individuals may adopt them, and then eventually they may become common practice. I'd rather see that form of co-creation rather than somebody smart spends 4 years coming up with a big document and then publishes it for the entire world. To me, that just doesn't feel right. That's the old Robert's Rules of Order way of doing things, right? So that's why I've kind of intentionally taken this micro, bottoms-up, emergent, hopefully, just seeding some ideas and see whether or not they take root. Because I've always been trying to think, does this scale? Does this get us to where we want to go by starting from ground zero? Almost axiomatic, first principles. Over.
It just reminds me of the method appreciative inquiry, because that is meant for working with two people. So they do the interviews with each other, and that's the basic. And from there, you can do it together in groups of 4, and up to the biggest I know, it was about 5,000 people in South Africa. But it always starts with 2. So what you just said, the scaling up, is there something that works with a small group and can be extended to the whole world or to hundreds and thousands, but makes sense already now? And I like that.
Okay, Alex, why don't you go, because I know you've had your finger up, but then I'll respond later.
The groups I attended in the recovery arena, they often had a council meeting, a regional district meeting, where some of the elected members would turn up to talk about the progress of the group and what have you. And at the beginning of that meeting, they would always read the 12 traditions as a precursor to beginning the meeting. Everyone would sit around and with their cup of coffee, and they'd go around the room and read one each. The 12 traditions was always on a banner hanging on the wall. So if we had a short, concise, 9-point abbreviated version of what the GCC is all about, then the local groups could use that in their meetings to begin the meeting, which would put everyone automatically focused on that intention of the commons, the ground-up commons, the groupthink, if you like. There's dangerous connotations in there, I know, but I think it will work out.
I can see Doug vigorously nodding his head on this one. Not.
I mean, I was involved when my son went through scouting program in the States, and I was very involved with that, and used vastly more substantively and regularly than I think was common practice in a lot of the troops. The scout law, the constructs of scouting on a principles basis and on a values basis. So I'm not, and I think, you know, the 12-step programs are, you know, that stuff serves in a similar way. It's a really fundamental statement of principles / values. There really isn't anything prescriptive I can think of, and I don't have intimate familiarity. I'm not a graduate, but we have friends. My wife and I have friends that we've helped with those challenges, and we've attended a fair number of meetings celebrating them and being around for them. I think a lot of what my work with Fabian has been is around getting to an expression or alignment of values as a sort of operating thing that facilitates groups. Part of what comes up for me is the ingredients of this make sense to me. A couple of them are, I think, less of sort of group dynamic than individual domain to me. But you know, I recognize the significance, importance of the concept, even if through my lens it operates at an individual level. There's no reason to go to an aggregative expression or statement. In the storytelling of it, there is there's an energy and sort of thematic through line that I experience, Sam, in most of your stuff, where there's like an add-in. The agreements piece question came out of that as well. That there's the thing, which makes perfectly good and common sense, and I don't think anybody would have an issue with or disagree with or challenge. Like a lot of it operates in a common sense space and place. But there's a added ingredient on top of it that carries a kind of prescriptive or structural energy that doesn't necessarily, I'm not getting how that informs or enhances the value of the offer in the construct, but it's a sort of consistent, persistent emergence in a lot of your work that I think is unique and personal to you. And I would love to sort of inquire into that more and know more about what's under that. I think Grace last week was responding, sensing, picking up on that as well. And I'm not quite sure her question was really responded to or gotten by anybody in the conversation. It was sort of deflected and rolled off into a whole different thing. But I think she was picking up on the same thing. And it's something I would love to have you sort of share about, and I'd love to dig into. And I think these sessions are the place to do it, as part of it is you feeling complete and getting it out. Part of it is also each of us feeling complete and getting it in. And I'm not coming from a place of judgment or rejection or dismissal of anything. It's completely, this is your thing. But I want to understand whether there's something in that added sauce, that added energy, that isn't necessarily being made explicit, but is going on or is involved for you in where this emerges out of. So
if I may, let me take one first crack, because I know you've invited a big conversation on this. I know we're also past 2 hours, but let me take a first shot at that, because I have been thinking about that question, okay? Not just when Grace asked it, but also when you asked it earlier today. I think there's two components of it that come up for me, okay? One is I'm actually quite aware that what I'm offering is very much an opt-in, non-prescriptive proposal or a suggestion or some genetic material that I'd like to see people adopt. But there's two aspects of it that I get kind of attached to it. I thought that might be what you're kind of sensing, okay? One is that if this makes sense to someone, I have this desire, it's an attachment, to connect with people to whom this makes sense. And I want to know that. I want to know that if somebody actually embraces these ideas, that I can find them in some way. Because there's this belief that, hey, if I can find people like this, I want to be able to align and work with them. Better than I can align and work with a standard, person that's at monster.com or hire.com or, Yahoo, hiring or whatever it is. I want to work with people to whom this actually makes sense. I'm also attached to the second piece, which is one of scalability. I really would like to understand how these practices should and ought be practiced and evolved so that it potentially makes sense at some planetary impacting scale. Whether it's 3,000 people or 30,000 people or whatever, I want to know how we get there. So I am attached to that, okay? And it's probably because of, number one, I like working with people to whom this makes sense and who actually take a learning approach to life and an accountability, again, another triggering word, approach to life. And I have this sense of urgency that the world is getting more and more inhospitable to humans on a day-by-day basis. And that some of us do want to connect so that we can magnify and resonate our impact. I am attached to that. I admit it. So when you ask this question and when Grace asked that question, and I think about this for a little, there's probably much else beyond it, but those are the first two memes that come up. And thanks for allowing me to say that.
I felt now the things became clear. So I just wonder if I'll just try to describe it and see if this is what it is. Because there's an element of opt-in and there's an element of commitment. And that's maybe what seems to be a contradiction. But what I hear is that it's an option to commit. So, and you're looking for some people who want to commit and who feel aligned with the more specific suggestions. So since you're nodding, okay, then the next question is about scalability globally. So could this be scaled globally? Could we, for example, have a system of people's names where they present themselves as they want to, and they present relevant visions and even agreements and projects they want to engage in, and then have a larger system where it's easy to find the people that you actually are aligned with and you want to commit to the same specific. Does that describe the vision?
Glenn, I think you've actually stated it quite well, because you've set the stage for me to draw attention to what I think are the secondary effects of the principles that I outlined last week and some of the practices here, which is that if I find people who are wanting to embrace these practices and principles and willing to share their periodic peer reviews with each other, to me, I would personally find those people much easier to trust. Again, another triggering word. And therefore to work with, and therefore to collaborate with. Trust is, as Stephen Covey says, that's a limiter right now to the speed of speed of collaboration, right? And so trying to figure out how we scale trust, to me, is one of the challenges we have as humans. How to be, this way in more than just a family concept, for us to actually see ourselves as some kind of a global family. So that's very much a part of it. The other part is, this actually to me is a very fundamental piece of identity. What I do, what I learn, who I connect with, what I'm involved with, what I believe, what I'm active with, how I do things, what good means to me. Those are all components of what, to me, are a new way of representing identity. So if I can share with a circle or a community of trust this notion of identity, and I can look at everyone else in that community in such a deep way, then I think we can accelerate our arrival at collaboration and deepen our potential collaboration, and really, start from a stronger foundation that, deeper trust than it would be with just regular strangers meeting on the street. That's a belief. I haven't proven it, but that's my hope. Over.
All of this does seem to presuppose a process that enables people to clearly formulate their own goals and visions. But I guess that's kind of included in the whole process.
Yeah.
And it's included in what we're doing here too, I would say, to some extent. Yeah, that's a part of the perspectives too, right? So then you clarify that even more, which of course can change the formulation of your page, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. You heard that very well.
That makes sense.
Gertrude?
I'm just wondering, thank you for sharing, because that makes it clearer. I don't know if it gets to all the points that Doug was talking about, but at least quite a bit. And I'm just wondering, if it, like explicit and implicit, when I'm thinking about the Friday night group, I wasn't there because of different reasons, one of which was yesterday that I was just exhausted and tired. But there is something going on that way, like with the WordPress and the linking is there, maybe not yet a calendar, but something. It's how do we track and what needs to be done. There are so many of those already in there what's happening on Friday. So it maybe the people are already there and are already doing many of those, but it's not so explicit that you would say, okay, that's it. And
Yeah.
and so I would like you to take into account that the people that are here, not only here, I mean here, are the right ones that
Yeah.
you're looking for.
No, I think that's great. I really do. I have just one more corollary that I'd like to offer, and that is specifically on this notion of calendar. Okay. The only rule I have about calendars is you should only use one calendar. I've tried using multiple calendars, and it's just a recipe for confusion. So if there was anything that I would actually suggest, would be something that would be a core object or a core artifact that we might want to rally around, would be the calendar/chronology idea. But that's a big conversation, so I'll just put it on the table and then leave it there.
We already have a version of it, don't we? The chronology is the series of videos, the calendar is the pin.
Yeah, but it's incomplete, right? It's in Facebook, and it's in YouTube, and it's in SoundCloud, and it's in Google Docs.
Exactly. And it's just a second, Gertrude's point. I think she mentioned something important, that what Josh especially has been focusing on Friday is, as I see it, to make it more possible to have this system you're describing. So it feels like this is the framework which moves us in this direction.
Yeah, by all means. I think there's many ways to satisfy what I've tried to offer here as a way of thinking. WordPress is definitely one of them. To my knowledge, WordPress doesn't handle calendaring very well, but that might be my inadequacy of knowledge, that it may have a very good calendaring component. But anyway, rather than get into specifics, I just wanted to, I know there's much more time to talk about specifics of what each of those 9 could be, but I just wanted to lay out this set of ideas. I really welcome the feedback and a lot of the what if and a lot of the connections, because I am learning from all of this. I really do appreciate this. And I really appreciate you're giving me an opportunity to at least lay all this out, okay? That, to me, is very generous of you, and I really do appreciate that. And I know we've already gone on 2 hours and 15 minutes, so I'm proposing we probably head into a closing round, unless there's more you guys want to bring up.
It feels like a completion point for me. And in terms of this round, I also think it's pretty clear that we're not done. This is SAM 5, so we have SAM 6 coming up in a week. This is very helpful. Has proven to be really helpful for me in understanding sort of multiple facets of what's going on around all of this, in terms of not just sort of vision and mechanics, but also the you in that, and the way you're looking at the world, and the way some of the lenses and filters and perspectives that you're applying. And so this has been really, really, valuable and terrific that way. So I want to acknowledge and thank you for the share. And I look forward to next.
You guys are so generous with the time and attention. I really do still feel this bit that's kind of self-indulgent about it. So I will try and put together remaining pieces and hopefully wrap it up, quote unquote, in a session 6. But we'll see. I mean, the first few ones were more motivation and derivation and history. The latest ones are more specific and tactical and, like I say, more possibly mental and less heartfelt. But please don't lose the heart at the root of all of these suggestions. The heart at the root of all of these is to connect, to resonate, to align, to collaborate, to create that future that we all want together in a good way, to coexist with compassion, simply with patience. That's what I really want. And that's what I'm trying to do at the root of all of this.
Yeah, been very,
Understood.
and just yeah, I think it's been very clarifying today. And I mean, also with these deep dives, we're also sort of experimenting with the format. So I think it's good that we don't feel any rush, certainly at this point. But so I mean, certainly part 6 and maybe 7 or how much is needed, right? But what I want to get out of today is one thing that became very clear to me today was this distinction between opt-in and commitment. And it became clear to me that the model you're describing is an opt-in to make a commitment. And this is maybe something that has triggered some reactions when you've spoken about this before. So maybe that's a good takeaway from this to consider what could be the simplest way of describing this idea, because they sound like contradictions, but it actually isn't a contradiction, because you're describing a model where it's totally voluntary to commit to what you want to commit to. But then this action of holding oneself accountable is very important, and I know many people are very interested in it, and even more people probably need it. So it's obviously of great value. But that was that became a lot clearer to me, and it also became clear that that's maybe what has triggered some of the reactions, that has been somewhat unclear. So maybe that's something to consider. What's the simple way of expressing that idea?
One note on that, thank you for highlighting that distinction, and that is, I would like to reference Tammy's remarks several weeks ago about how the fact that she and I entered into CCCs with each other as an explicit commitment kept us going towards those late stages of that GCF proposal. She may be overestimating, the impact it had, but I actually thought that it was generous that she had said that, and therefore that commitment actually did mean something to the relationship that she and I have, and has held us together throughout a lot of disagreement. You guys may not have seen I dis.
Where that I saw something like that, and let's explore if I think for me that's an open invitation to opt in, or whatever that's called, and then to see, okay, that's good, and what do we want to commit to? And if that moral part is out, that you have to, otherwise you're not a good group, otherwise it doesn't work, these connotations to it, what that might have some hooks. If they are not there, it's just that invitation, then I think it's easier to come to. And when you were talking about commitment, actually you posted a commitment in there. Will you commit to not quitting? Even though you don't commit to anything else, and not come to every evening, but just not quitting. And for me, that was easy. It was like, yeah, sure. I want the world to exist in, I don't know how many years. I want my great grandchildren to have a great life. There's no question. So yeah, thank you very much. And I think we have to, or I do apologize when I took too much time, because it's yours, and it doesn't matter how many sessions we have. The Saturday is for the person in the middle, no matter how many times you take. And so I want you to bring us back also. So when we are off the rails, just please, could you come back? I know you're humble enough not to do it, but you could support us in doing so.
Thanks a lot for those remarks, Gertrude. It means a lot.
I fell out, I think, a little bit there, so I don't know if that has influenced the recording. It says that it still records, so yeah, hopefully we're good. But yeah, this has been great, so I guess, are we closing up for the evening? So
I have one more remark. Maybe we consider that the people that are here now in this group are the right ones.
It's a saying I like. We're the ones we've been waiting for.
yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah. But Sam, that's your call. That's your choice.
I'll do a check.
Yeah,
I'll do
Alex?
a quick check out. I was just going to mention, if I do a deep dive, I don't know why, but I'd probably like to limit it to 2 sessions and try and cram it all in 2 sessions, the first half and the second half.
You'll
You
see,
mean
Alex.
if it's your turn?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of it has to do with the questions that you get as well. Yeah. Anyway, thank you all very much for attending. It means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this was wonderful. Good night.
One more.